Section 3 of The Astral Plane, Its Inhabitants, Scenery, and Phenomena by C.W. Ledbetter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Inhabitants, Part 1. Having sketched in, however slightly, the background of our picture, we must now attempt to fill in the figures, to describe the inhabitants of the astral plane. The immense variety of these entities makes it exceedingly difficult to arrange and tabulate them. Perhaps the most convenient method will be to divide them into three great classes: the human, the non-human, and the artificial. Class 1. Human. The human denizens of Kamaloka fall naturally into two groups, the living and the dead, or, to speak more accurately, those who still have a physical body and those who do not. The first group, the living. The entities which manifest on the astral plane during physical life may be subdivided into four classes. 1. The adept or Telle in the Maya Varupa. This body is the artificial vehicle used on the four lower or Rupa divisions of the devachanic plane by those capable of functioning there during earth life, and is formed out of the substance of the mind body. The pupil is at first unable to construct this for himself, and has, therefore, to be content with his ordinary astral body composed of the less refined matter of the kamic aura. But at a certain stage of his progress, the master himself forms his Maya Varupa for him for the first time, and afterwards instructs and assists him until he can make it for himself easily and expeditiously. When this faculty is attained, this vehicle is habitually used in place of the grosser astral body, since it permits of instant passage from the astral to the devachanic plane and back again at will, and allows of the use at all times of the higher powers belonging to its own plane. It must be noted, however, that a person traveling in the Maya Varupa is not perceptible to merely astral vision, unless he chooses to make himself so by gathering around him particles of astral matter, and so creating for himself a temporary body suitable to that plane, though such a temporary creation would resemble the ordinary astral body only as a materialization resembles the physical body. In each case, it is a manifestation of a higher entity on a lower plane, in order to make himself visible to those whose senses cannot yet transcend that plane. But whether he be in the Maya Varupa or the astral body, the pupil who is introduced to the astral plane under the guidance of a competent teacher has always the fullest possible consciousness there, and is, in fact, himself, exactly as his friends know him on earth, minus only the four lower principles in the former case, and the three lower in the latter, and plus the additional powers and faculties of this higher condition, which enable him to carry on far more easily and far more efficiently on that plane during sleep the theosophical work which occupies so much of his thought in his waking hours. Whether he will remember fully and accurately on the physical plane what he has done or learnt on the other depends largely, as stated before, upon whether he is able to carry his consciousness without intermission from one state to the other. 2. The psychically developed person who is not under the guidance of a master. Such a person may or may not be spiritually developed, for the two forms of advancement do not necessarily go together, and when a man is born with psychic powers, it is simply the result of efforts made during a previous incarnation, which may have been of the noblest and most unselfish character, or, on the other hand, may have been ignorant and ill-directed, or even entirely unworthy. Such a one will usually be perfectly conscious when out of the body, but, for want of proper training, is liable to be greatly deceived as to what he sees. He will often be able to range through the different subdivisions of the astral plane almost as fully as persons belonging to the last class, but sometimes he is especially attracted to some one division, and rarely travels beyond its influences. His recollection of what he has seen may vary according to the degree of his development, through all the stages, from perfect clearness to utter distortion or blank oblivion. He will appear always in the astral body, since, by the hypothesis, he does not know how to form the Maya Varupa. 3. The ordinary person. That is, the person without any psychic development, floating about in his astral body in a more or less unconscious condition. In deep slumber, the higher principles in their astral vehicle almost invariably withdraw from the body and hover in its immediate neighborhood, practically almost as much asleep as the latter. In some cases, however, this astral vehicle is less lethargic and floats dreamily about on the various astral currents, occasionally recognizing other people in a similar condition and meeting with experiences of all sorts, pleasant and unpleasant, the memory of which, hopelessly confused and often travestied into a grotesque caricature of what really happened, will cause the man to think next morning what a remarkable dream he has had. These extruded astral bodies are almost shapeless and very indefinite in outline in the case of the more backward races and individuals, but as the man develops in intellect and spirituality, his floating astral becomes better defined and more closely resembles his physical encasement. Since the psychical faculties of mankind are in course of evolution, and individuals are at all stages of their development, this class naturally melts by imperceptible gradations into the former one. 4. The black magician or his pupil. This class corresponds closely to the first, except that the development has been for evil instead of good, and the powers acquired are used for purely selfish purposes instead of for the benefit of humanity. Among its lower ranks come members of the Negro race who practice the ghastly rites of Obeah or voodoo schools, and the medicine men of many a savage tribe, while higher in intellect, and therefore the more blameworthy, stand the Tibetan black magicians, who are often, though incorrectly, called by Europeans Dugpas, a title properly belonging, as is quite correctly explained by Surgeon Major Waddell in his recent work on the Buddhism of Tibet, only to the Bhutanese subdivision of the great Khargyu sect, which is part of what may be called the semi-reformed school of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dugpas no doubt deal in tantric magic to a considerable extent, but the real red-hatted, entirely unreformed sect is that of the Nin Mapa, though far beyond them, in a still lower depth, lie the Bonpa, the votaries of the aboriginal religion who have never accepted any form of Buddhism at all. It must not, however, be supposed that all Tibetan sects, except the Gulagpa, are necessarily and altogether evil. A truer view would be that, as the rules of the other sects permit considerably greater laxity of life and practice, the proportion of self-seekers among them is likely to be much larger than among the stricter reformers. The investigator will occasionally meet on the astral plane students of occultism from all parts of the world, belonging to lodges quite unconnected with the masters of whom theosophists know most, who are in many cases most earnest and self-sacrificing seekers after truth. It is noteworthy, however, that all such lodges are at least aware of the existence of the great Himalayan Brotherhood and acknowledge it as containing among its members the highest adepts now known on earth. The second group, the dead. To begin with, of course, this very word dead is an absurd misnomer, as most of the entities classified under this heading are as fully alive as we are ourselves. The term must be understood as meaning those who are, for the time, unattached to a physical body. They may be subdivided into 9 principal classes as follows. 1. The Nirmana Kaya. This class is just mentioned in order to make the catalogue complete. It is, of course, very rarely indeed that so exalted a being manifests himself upon so low a plane as this. When for any reason connected with his sublime work he found it desirable to do so, he would probably create a temporary astral body for the purpose, just as the adept in the Mayavarupa would do, since the more refined vesture would be invisible to astral sight. Further information about the position and work of the Nirmanakayas may be found in Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Glossary and The Voice of the Silence. 2. The Cella awaiting reincarnation. It has frequently been stated in theosophical literature that when the pupil reaches a certain stage, he is able, with the assistance of his master, to escape from the action of what is in ordinary cases the law of nature, which carries a human being into the devachanic condition after death, there to receive his due reward in the full working out of all the spiritual forces which his highest aspirations have set in motion while on earth. As the pupil must, by the hypothesis, be a man of pure life and high thought, it is probable that in his case these spiritual forces will be of abnormal strength, and therefore if he, to use the technical expression, takes his devachan, it is likely to be an extremely long one. But if instead of taking it, he chooses the path of renunciation, thus, even at his low level and in his humble way, beginning to follow the footsteps of the great master of renunciation, Gautama Buddha himself, he is able to expend that reserve of force in quite another direction, to use it for the benefit of mankind, and so, infinitesimal though his offering may be, to take his tiny part in the great work of the Nirmanakayas. By taking this course, he no doubt sacrifices centuries of intense bliss, but, on the other hand, he gains the enormous advantage of being able to continue his life of work and progress without a break. When a pupil who has decided to do this dies, he simply steps out of his body, as he has often done before, and waits upon the astral plane until a suitable reincarnation can be arranged for him by his master. This being a marked departure from the usual course of procedure, the permission of a very high authority has to be obtained before the attempt can be made. Yet, even when this is granted, so strong is the force of natural law that it is said that the pupil must be careful to confine himself strictly to the Kamaloka while the matter is being arranged, lest if he once, even for a moment, touch the devachanic plane, he might be swept, as by an irresistible current, into the line of normal evolution again. In some cases, though these are rare, he is enabled to avoid the trouble of a new birth by being placed directly in an adult body whose previous tenant has no further use for it, but naturally it is not often that a suitable body is available. Far more frequently he has to wait on the astral plane, as mentioned before, until the opportunity of a fitting birth presents itself. In the meantime, however, he is losing no time, for he is just as fully himself as he ever was, and is able to go on with the work given him by his master, even more quickly and efficiently than when in the physical body, since he is no longer hampered by the possibility of fatigue. His consciousness is, of course, quite complete, and he roams at will through all the divisions of the Kamaloka with equal facility. The Cella awaiting reincarnation is by no means one of the common objects of the astral plane, but still he may be met with occasionally, and therefore he forms one of our classes. No doubt, as the evolution of humanity proceeds, and an ever-increasing proportion enter upon the path of holiness, this class will become more numerous. End of section 3.